the sound of a ceiling fan whirring lazily. Papers shuffle. A deep voice hums faintly to an old highlife tune playing on a crackling radio. Inside a modest but well-kept office at Sunrise Bank, the air smells faintly of fresh coffee and polished mahogany. Behind the large desk sits Professor Daniel Obeng, now in his late 60s, spectacles perched on his nose. His once jet-black hair has given way to dignified silver, and his hands, strong but lined, rest on a leather-bound file. Through the blinds, the heat of the Accra afternoon spills in golden streaks. Outside, street vendors call out, "Kelawele, hot kelawele, sweet and spicy. Pure water, ice-cold pure water here." Daniel flips open the file. His eyes scan the loan application, name, details, request amount. But then, his brow tightens. He leans back slowly in his chair, removing his glasses. The name on the form? Kwame Mensah. Daniel's mind drifts back, not just years, but decades, to a time when the air smelled of chalk and dust, and his voice echoed in a crowded lecture hall. The sun rose warm and fierce over the University of Cape Coast campus. Palm trees swayed gently in the coastal breeze, carrying with it the salty scent of the nearby sea. The red dirt paths between faculty buildings were alive with the shuffle of sandals and polished shoes. A bell rang in the distance, sharp and metallic, calling students to their first lectures. In the open quadrangle, a small group of students were gathered under a flamboyant tree, trading jokes in Twi, Ga, and English. Among them, Kwame Mensah, barely 21, leaned back on the wooden bench with the cocky confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was sharply dressed for a student, tailored trousers, shiny brown leather shoes, and a fresh haircut that glistened in the morning light. He was laughing loudly at his own story. Kwame. And then I told the lecturer, "Sir, if this is economics, then my uncle is already a professor. He sells tomatoes at Kaneshi Market, and he knows more about supply and demand than you." Ha! His friends roared with laughter, some slapping their thighs. But what Kwame didn't notice was that Professor Daniel Obeng, the very man he was mocking, was passing by at that moment, his stack of lecture notes in hand. Daniel's footsteps slowed. He caught only fragments of the words, but enough to know they were about him. Still, he said nothing. His face remained calm, almost unreadable, save for a faint tightening at the jaw. Inside Lecture Hall B, the air was thick with the mingling smells of chalk dust, old books, and the faint sweetness of roasted plantain from the vendor outside. Students sat on worn wooden benches, their notebooks ready. Daniel stepped up to the front, his calm, deep voice filling the room. "Daniel, good morning, class. Today we discuss the fundamentals of economic systems, what drives them and what destroys them." Kwame leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, a sly smirk on his face. "Daniel, now, I know some of you believe you already understand economics from the marketplace. And yes, our markets are living classrooms. But remember this proverb: the fact that you can cook yam does not mean you can prepare a feast." Some students chuckled. Kwame's smirk faltered just a little. Daniel began to write on the chalkboard, clean, precise handwriting, and his lecture was not just about numbers. He wove in African history, local business practices, and even traditional proverbs to explain supply and demand. The room was silent except for the scratching of pens. All except for Kwame, who leaned over to his friend, whispering, "This man talks too much. By the time he finishes, the market women have already made more money than his salary." A couple of students stifled laughter. Daniel paused mid-sentence. He didn't look at Kwame directly, but his tone grew firmer. "Daniel, in life, you can choose to mock what you do not understand, or you can humble yourself to learn. One choice feeds your stomach, the other feeds your destiny." A few heads turned toward Kwame, but Daniel moved on, continuing his lecture as though nothing had happened. As the day went on, Kwame's arrogance grew. He didn't know that the man he belittled was not just a lecturer, but a figure whose reach extended far beyond the classroom. A man who would one day hold the pen that could sign or deny his dreams. The lecture hall buzzed like a beehive as the old professor shuffled toward the blackboard, chalk in one hand, a worn leather satchel in the other. From the back row, Tunde, the tall, broad-shouldered final-year student with a reputation for quick wit and arrogance, leaned back in his seat. His friends, 4 of them, dressed sharply despite the midday heat, grinned as he whispered, loud enough for others to hear. "Tunde, Ah! Sia's Professor Bello de Waka like old tortoise. Naso him de drag legs since I enter this school. A ripple of muffled laughter spread through the room. Professor Bello paused at the board, his hands still midair. Slowly he turned, his weathered face calm, but his eyes steady. There was no anger, only something deeper, unreadable. Tunde, my son, remember the Yoruba proverb, Amot taba feran agba, apetugbe lore. A child who respects the elderly walks through life with blessings.
The class went quiet for a moment, but Tund smirked. Tund, sir, blessings no day pay bills oh. A louder burst of laughter followed, this time with even the quieter students giggling. Professor Bello simply nodded, adjusted his glasses, and began writing a complex formula on the board. His chalk scratched softly against the surface, scree, scree, while outside the open windows, the faint sound of a hawker's bell rang through the campus, selling roasted plantains. By the end of that week, Tund's joke had spread. In the hostel corridors, in the cafeteria over plates of jollof rice, people mimicked his line, blessings no day pay bills oh. It became a catchphrase among his friends. Whenever Professor Bello walked past, some would cough into their fists, muttering the words. The professor never reacted, only greeted them with a gentle nod, sometimes humming an old House of Folk tune under his breath. One afternoon, during midterm results collection, Tund swaggered into the professor's cramped office. The air inside was heavy with the earthy smell of kunu, a millet drink cooling in a gourd on the table. Papers were stacked high like termite mounds, and a small radio in the corner played Fela Kuti's Water No Get Enemy. Professor Bello, sit down, Tund. Tund, thank you, sir. But I beg, make it quick, have somewhere to be. The professor slid his exam script across the desk, 42% in red ink. Tund frowned. Tund, sir, this your marking no fair oh. I suppose get at least 60. Professor Bello adjusted his glasses. Professor Bello, you have intelligence, but pride is clouding your wisdom. And pride, my son, is like a bottle left in the rain, it will swell, then rot. Tund scoffed. Tund, sir, not just class. No be life and death matter. The professor smiled faintly, as though seeing something far beyond this moment. Professor Bello, we shall see, my boy. We shall see. Outside the office, the campus was alive with the smell of fried akara and the sound of talking drums from the student cultural group rehearsing near the library. Tund walked away from the professor's office, script in hand, laughing with his friend Chike. Chike, my guy, the man no even vex for you. Maybe him don old too much to fight. Tund, a beg, make we go drink malt. Old men and their proverbs no day feed anybody. But what neither of them knew was that in a few years, the same old man they mocked would hold something far more valuable than a red pen, and their fates would cross again in a way Tund could never imagine. The dry harmattan winds blew dust into every corner of the city that year. Kwame was no longer a boy in a lecture hall. He was a man in his late 20s, wearing a once white shirt now faded to the color of pap. His shoes were scuffed, the soles barely hanging on. The sounds of the city roared around him, trotro conductors shouting routes, women in colorful Kent cloth bargaining loudly over baskets of plantains, and the distant beat of drums from a funeral procession. Kwame's dream of a thriving startup had collapsed faster than a clay pot dropped from the rooftop. His reckless spending, poor planning, and arrogance had drained his savings. For months, he had been drifting, borrowing small amounts from friends, eating one meal a day, and avoiding calls from creditors. He thought of the day he had laughed at the old professor. The memory was a faint itch at the back of his mind, something he brushed away whenever it tried to surface. Pride had kept him from thinking too much about it. Kwame had one last plan. The city's new youth enterprise loan fund promised up to 50,000 cedis for young entrepreneurs. The application process was strict. You needed a business plan, guarantors, and the approval of the bank's senior committee. This is my chance, Kwame told himself one hot afternoon, as he sipped on a small plastic sachet of water by a roadside kiosk. He imagined the new beginning, a small poultry farm on the outskirts of town. Chickens clucking, eggs selling in the market, steady income. He could pay his debts, rebuild his life. That night, he worked under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, scribbling business plans on sheets of lined paper. Outside, crickets sang, and the smell of smoked tilapia from a neighbor's fire drifted through his window. A week later, Kwame stood before the tall glass doors of Heritage Savings and Loans. It was a grand building, marble floors, air-conditioned halls, and a receptionist who greeted customers with a practiced smile. Kwame wore his best clothes, an ironed shirt, a faded tie, and trousers with one stubborn tear neatly sewn at the seam. He clutched his brown envelope containing all the loan documents. "Go to the 3rd floor," the receptionist said, pointing him to the elevator. Kwame's heart pounded as the elevator doors opened to a quiet, carpeted corridor. A small brass sign read, "Loan Committee, Senior Office." He was ushered into a waiting room with deep leather chairs. The scent of furniture polish and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. He could hear faint voices from the adjoining boardroom. The door to the boardroom finally opened. A tall man in a crisp navy blue suit stepped out, followed by 2 other committee members. His hair was neatly trimmed, but streaked with gray. His walking stick tapped gently against the floor, a deliberate, measured rhythm. Kwame froze. His breath caught in his throat. It was Professor Mensah. The same old professor he had once mocked in front of an entire lecture hall. The same man whose voice had been patient and steady, even as Kwame's cruel laughter rang out. Except now, there was something different. The professor's posture was straighter, his suit immaculate. And his eyes, still sharp, scanned the room with quiet authority. Kwame felt a knot in his stomach. The words of an old Akan proverb suddenly came to him: "The child who does not respect the elder's advice will carry a heavy load on his head." And right now, Kwame felt that load pressing down. The waiting room of Unity Bank, Lagos branch, buzzed with a mix of chatter and impatience. The whirring of ceiling fans mixed with the faint hum of the old air conditioner that coughed occasionally, as if tired from years of duty. Behind the counter, the smell of fresh biro ink and paper dust hung faintly in the air. Men in starched agbada waited beside women in brightly patterned ankara, their files clutched tightly under their arms. The security guard at the door adjusted his cap and called out in a loud voice, "Next person. Loan Department, Room 3. Chitty stood up from his seat, straightened his navy blue suit, and picked up his worn leather briefcase. It wasn't a brand new suit, he had bought it 2 years ago when he first started his small logistics company, but he had ironed it so sharply that the creases could cut paper. Inside his briefcase were the documents that represented his dream, a loan proposal to expand his business into neighboring states. The numbers were good, the market potential was strong, and Chitty had faith this would be the moment everything changed. As he walked toward room 3, he rehearsed his pitch in his head. "Good morning, sir. My name is Chitty Okafor, CEO of Swiftways Logistics." He smiled at the thought of being called CEO. Even though his company only had 3 staff members and 1 rusty delivery van, he believed in speaking success into existence. The door to room 3 was half open. Chitty knocked lightly. "Come in," came a deep, calm voice. He stepped inside. It was a modest office, cream-colored walls, a large mahogany desk with neatly arranged files, and behind it, a man in a well-pressed white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The faint scent of shea butter mixed with old books filled the air. The man's head was bowed slightly as he stamped a file, the rhythmic thud, thud, of the stamp echoing in the quiet room. His hair was now almost entirely gray, but it was his face, calm, wise, lined with the years, that made Chitty freeze. It was Professor Adewale. For a moment, Chitty thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. His mind flashed back to that day in university, the lecture hall, his mocking laughter, his friends' cheers, and the professor's quiet, piercing gaze. Professor Adewale looked up slowly. His eyes locked on Chidi's, and a faint, knowing smile played on his lips. "Mr. Chidi Okafor," the professor said softly, without looking at the file in front of him. "We meet again." Chidi swallowed hard. "Professor. I didn't know you worked here." "I don't work here," Adewale replied, leaning back in his chair. "I oversee this branch's loan board. Every significant loan application passes through my desk for final approval." The weight of the words settled heavily in the air. Chidi stood awkwardly, unsure whether to sit or remain standing. He finally lowered himself into the chair opposite the desk, his palms sweaty. The professor picked up Chidi's file and adjusted his glasses. "Swiftways Logistics, expanding to other states, interesting. Your proposal is thorough." For a moment, his tone was purely professional. But then he set the file down and looked directly at Chidi. "Tell me, Mr. Okafor, do you still believe that old age is a sickness to be mocked?" The words hit like a whip. Chidi's stomach twisted. "Sir, about that day. I was young, foolish," the professor raised a hand. "I do not need excuses. I have heard many in my time. But I am curious, what have the years taught you?" Chidi's mind raced. He wanted to say he had matured, that he had learned humility. But in that moment, he knew the professor could see through lies as easily as sunlight through clear water. The professor leaned forward, his voice steady. "In my village, we say, the young may run faster, but the elder knows the road. Tell me, Chidi, do you now understand the road you walk?" Chidi lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir. I understand now. Life has humbled me. I know now that respect is more valuable than money. And I regret, deeply, how I behaved." The professor studied him for a long moment. Outside, the distant sound of Okada horns and street vendors calling their wares filtered through the window. Finally, Adewale spoke. "Very well. Your business plan is sound. But this loan is more than numbers. It is also a test of character. I will approve it, but only if you promise me one thing." Chidi looked up eagerly. "Anything, sir. When you succeed, and you will, remember to lift others, not mock them. Pride builds walls, but humility builds bridges." The professor picked up his pen, signed the approval page, and slid it across the desk. Chidi's hands trembled as he took it. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "I will not forget this." The professor gave a small nod. "Good. Go now. Build your road." The First National Development Bank sat like a proud lion in the heart of the city. Its towering glass facade reflected the afternoon sun, while the bustle of traffic outside gave it an air of constant motion. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood, leather chairs, and brewed coffee from the small cafe in the corner. The sound of clicking keyboards mixed with the muffled shuffle of feet on tiled floors. Kofi Mensah, now a man in his late 20s, walked in wearing his finest suit, a deep navy, freshly pressed. His shoes shone like polished ebony. The faint scent of imported cologne followed him as he walked confidently to the reception desk. Receptionist, smiling politely. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you?" "Kofi, I have a 2 p.m. appointment with the senior loan officer. Mr. Kwame Owusu." The receptionist typed quickly, glanced at her screen, and nodded. Receptionist, "Yes, Mr. Mensah. Please have a seat, he'll be with you shortly." Kofi sat in the waiting area, tapping his fingers on the armrest. Around him, other applicants clutched folders and nervously reviewed their papers. But Kofi? He was relaxed, or so he wanted to appear. Inside, his heart beat a little faster. This loan meant expansion for his small logistics company. It meant trucks, warehouses, it meant becoming big. A tall office door swung open. Out stepped a man in a charcoal gray suit, walking with the dignified slowness of someone in command. His hair was now completely silver, his glasses still perched low on his nose. But the face, oh, the face was unmistakable. It was Professor Kwame Owusu. Kofi froze. The same old professor from years ago. The same man he had mocked in the university courtyard. The same man whose teaching he once laughed at, calling him outdated and irrelevant. Professor Owusu, smiling faintly, voice warm yet measured, "Mr. Mensah, please, come in." Kofi stood, his legs suddenly heavier than before. He followed the professor into the office, feeling as though the polished floor might swallow him whole. The office smelled of cedarwood and faintly of African black soap, that earthy scent from the professor's days in the village, perhaps. On the wall hung framed certificates from universities around the world. Behind the desk, a large window opened to the city skyline. Professor Owusu gestured to the seat across from his desk. "Professor Owusu, please, sit. I understand you're here for a business loan." Kofi, clearing throat, "Yes, sir. My company has been growing, and with this funding, I believe we can," but before he could finish, the professor raised a hand. "Professor Owusu, I remember you." The words landed like a drumbeat. Kofi's palms began to sweat. "Kofi, sir. Professor Owusu, leaning back, I steady years ago, in the courtyard, you laughed at me. You told your friends I was too old to understand the modern world. That I was, what was the phrase?" Kofi swallowed hard. Kofi, quietly an old tree that couldn't grow new branches. The professor chuckled, not bitterly, but almost amused. "Professor Owusu, yes. That was it. An old tree." The professor leaned forward now, his voice calm but firm. "Professor Owusu, Kofi, do you know what we say in Akan? Sewa esi dua, ena enia atumi twane ho, na atumi nyaina. If you say a tree is old, remember that its roots still hold the soil." Kofi sat in silence, his face hot with shame. The professor slowly picked up Kofi's application file. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the numbers, the plans, the projections. Then, he set the file down. "Professor Owusu, your proposal is strong. Your numbers are solid. But before I make my decision, I want to ask you one thing." Kofi straightened, hopeful. "Professor Owusu, tell me, why should I trust you to honor this loan, when years ago, you could not honor even the dignity of another man?" The room went still. The ticking wall clock suddenly felt louder than ever. The silence in the loan office was heavy, as if even the air itself was holding its breath. Outside, the bustling city noise filtered in faintly, the honking of taxis, the faint melody of a street guitarist playing Malaika, and the distant shouts of hawkers selling roasted maize. But inside, it was just the two of them, the once arrogant student, now humbled, and the old professor, now holding the gavel of fate. Professor Okoro slowly closed the file in front of him, removed his glasses, and placed them neatly on the table. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking, and simply looked at Tund for a long moment. "Professor Okoro," softly, but with weight, "Tund, do you remember the day you stood in my class and called me irrelevant?" Tund's face flushed with shame. His lips trembled. "Tund, sir. I was foolish, young. I thought I knew everything." The professor nodded slowly, his weathered fingers drumming lightly on the desk. "Professor Okoro, in my culture, there is a saying, a child who will not listen to elders will find himself walking at night without a torch. That day, you chose darkness. And now, you are here." Tund swallowed hard, the weight of those words settling on him like a mountain. The professor opened the file again, flipping through Tund's loan application. He saw the business plan, ambitious, but flawed. He saw the numbers, hopeful, but fragile. And then he saw the section where Tund wrote, I am committed to running this business with integrity and humility." A faint smile played at the professor's lips. "Professor Okoro, integrity, humility, those are heavy words, my son. Do you carry them in your heart now? Or just on paper?" Tun's voice cracked. "Tund, sir. I have learned the hard way. Life has humbled me. I've seen hunger. I've seen my child ask me why we can't afford bread. I've worked under the sun until my skin burned. I am not the man I was in that classroom." The old professor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Professor Okoro, in our land, we say the river that forgets its source will dry up. I am not angry with you, Tund. Anger is for children. But I must be sure you have remembered your source." The tension in the room was so thick you could almost hear Tund's heartbeat. He lowered his head. "Tund, sir, if you give me this chance, I will not fail you. I will not fail my people." Professor Okoro stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the busy street below. He thought about the years, the hundreds of students, the long nights grading papers, the disappointments and the few bright stars. He thought about how Tund had once been blind with arrogance, and how life had stripped that blindness away. Then he turned back. With deliberate slowness, he signed the approval page of the loan application. The pen's scratch against the paper felt like thunder in the quiet room. He slid the file across the table. "Professor Okoro, firmly your loan is approved, but not because you deserve it, because I believe in second chances. Do not waste it. If you fail, you will not only fail yourself, you will make me regret this signature." Tund's eyes widened. Tears blurred his vision. He fell to his knees. "Tund, thank you, sir, thank you. I will honor this chance." The professor's expression softened just a little. "Professor Okoro, stand up, my son. Kneeling is for the ancestors. Go, build something worthy of your name. And remember, wealth without wisdom is a curse." Tund rose, holding the approved loan document to his chest as if it were gold. He stepped out of the office into the bright, hot African sun, the smell of grilled plantain from a street vendor drifting past. For the first time in years, he felt hope surge in his chest. Inside the office, Professor Okoro sat back down, staring at the door Tund had just walked through. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Professor Okoro, to himself sometimes, the best lessons are learned outside the classroom. The scene fades with the sound of drums in the distance, mingled with the city's hum, as the story closes on a note of redemption. Life has a way of circling back. The seeds you plant today, whether of kindness or arrogance, will grow and find their way to your doorstep. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, on this journey of growth, we rise by lifting others. Subscribe to Inspire until for more stories that touch the heart, stir the spirit, and remind us of the values that make us truly rich. Stay motivated, stay inspired, and let's grow together.
If you enjoyed this story, feel free to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.